Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Can we please take a moment to thank the people in Iran for sharing their messages earlier before this panel? Please. Thank you. It is my honor to stand before you all today as we discuss Iran's youth under the regime rule. My name is Nicole Sheriati, and I stand before you not only as a proud Iranian American, but as the daughter of a brave political prisoner. My father was imprisoned for daring to speak the truth, for demanding the very freedoms that this regime has stolen from generations of Iranians. I am honored to be able to stand here today because of my father's strength and bravery. And it is my duty as an Iranian American and as a supporter of MEK to continue sharing his story and many others and ensure that their sacrifice for a free Iran will never be forgotten. For over 4 decades, the regime has ruled through fear, humiliation, and bloodshed. It has tried to break Iran's youth, to strip them of hope, to silence their voices, and to convince them that change is impossible. But the regime has failed. It has failed because the youth of Iran, this brave, relentless generation, refuses to surrender their future. From shuttered universities and censored media to the brutality of the police, this government has done everything in its power to suffocate free thought. But every act of repression has only fueled defiance. Even when the internet is shut down, they find ways to connect. Even when their friends are arrested or killed, they continue to organize. They are fearless, and that is what terrifies the regime the most. Inside Iran, resistance units have become the beating heart of this movement, agile groups that defy tyranny with courage and creativity. And abroad, young Iranians amplify their voices, exposing the regime's crimes to the world and proving that this fight is both national and global. History tells us that Iran's youth has always been the force of change, from the constitutional revolution to the recent uprisings. They are the engine of progress and the nightmare of dictators. MEK has laid out a plan not just to resist, but to rebuild. A free economy, open universities, women's equality, and unrestricted access to information. These are not dreams, they are the blueprint of a democratic Iran where no young person will ever be silenced again for wanting to live free. So today, as we begin our discussion, let's remember, this is not just about the suffering of Iran's youth, it's about their strength. It's about a generation that has turned pain into power, oppression into organization, and fear into fire. With that, it's my honor to introduce our panelists to hear their insights and experiences and to honor the youth who continue to risk everything for a free Iran. I'm honored to invite Mohammad Reza to the floor. He stood at the forefront of the 2008-2009 uprisings in Iran, witnessing history in the making. Mohammad Reza, could you please share with us a brief glimpse of your experience and how it was like living in Iran for you?
Yes, thank you, Nicole. I would like to encourage the audience to think about what is that a young person would usually want as they grow up. When you are young and you have this all energy, you have this whole life in front of you. You want to be the best version of yourself. You want to grow up and you want to have your nation grow with you. You want to be someone. You want to do something. But as you start to engage in the society, as you start to engage with the system, you realize that the regime does not really care about any of your hopes and dreams. What they care about is how you dress, how you present yourself to the society, what ideology you follow. They are not really there to use the resources of the nation to provide for your well-being, but they are there to create these subordinates that follows their rule. If you don't follow their ideology, you're outcast. So then the question becomes, who grows up wanting to wage war? Who grows up wanting to eradicate nations? Who grows up wanting to export terrorism? Who sees all the corruption inside the system and wouldn't question it? Or who would, want to go after nukes and missiles? So, to answer your question of how it felt living in Iran, it felt like we were in a prison. It felt like, we didn't care for the regime. Regime didn't care for us. And it was fun to be with friends and family and, of course, make friendships. But when the ground is not there for your growth, your options are really limited. We were trying to survive the system without letting our dreams die. So, your options become very, very limited. It's either you have to accept the humiliation, accept the poverty that is imposed on you by this regime, or you have to get out of the country and, go after your dreams elsewhere. Or the third option would be to fight the regime back and try to gain control of your destiny.
So you mentioned the humiliation of the youth. Why do you think the regime keeps suppressing the youth when they know continuing this path will create a population that grows to feel alienated and deeply discontent with them?
Yeah, see, Nicole, the moment that this regime stops harassing the Iranian people, the moment that people don't feel afraid anymore, that's the moment that this regime has to answer some really serious questions as why the nation is on the trajectory that it is today, as why people are becoming poorer and poorer every day, and as why is that we kill people and we put people in prison for expressing themselves, for wanting something else, for having different ideas. We all know about Ali Younisi and Amir Hossein Moradi, who have been in prison for years now because they had different ideas, because they supported different values. And, Ehsan Faridi, he's 22 years old. He's on death row because of supporting MEK. Why is that? Why supporting another idea other than the idea the regime supports brings you death and imprisonment? So, see, back in 2008, 2009, when I was in Iran, I was very young. I was a teenager. I had not formed any political opinions, nor I was the age to vote. But protesting the election results, it somehow felt safe for a second. For a second, we thought that we have the chance to express ourselves. We thought that we can go out and show that we are not fine with everything that is going on. It was on that very moment that I was out, my neighbors joined, my friends were joining, and then the rest is history. You saw millions and millions of people on the streets protesting this regime. So the regime knows this. They are not going to allow for, mass demonstrations. They have failed everything. They have failed the economy. They have failed politics. They have failed foreign policy. They have failed internal management. The only thing that they haven't just yet failed is suppressing the Iranian people. So, it's no coincidence that Iran ranks #1 among the nations who kills minors, executes minors. It's no coincidence that they have ramped up executions because they are afraid of the people. The Mashhad Friday prayer leader, he said it the other day. He said, we are not afraid of a foreign army. We are afraid of a nation, of a generation that no longer believes in us. And that is exactly why the regime is not going to stop suppressing the Iranian people.
Thank you, Mohammad Reza, for sharing your personal experiences for fighting for freedom in Iran and exploring the topic of social and digital repression and how it is affecting the Iranian youth. I'd like now to introduce Mickey to the floor. Mickey had the opportunity to recently visit Paris to participate in a conference with Maryam Rajavi and hear more about the plan that she has for the future of Iran. Mickey, the MEK has outlined a comprehensive plan for Iran's youth, including economic freedom, support for universities, women's leadership, and internet access. How can this plan realistically empower young Iranians to lead change in their country?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you. Thank you for everyone being here and taking the time to listen to what we have to say. The event in Paris was amazing. It was a wonderful experience. The energy and the atmosphere among everyone, especially the youth and the Youth Congress, was incredibly motivating and refreshing. And Maryam Rajavi did an excellent job at explaining her plan for empowerment. She began by emphasizing the need to dismantle the many IRGC monopolies, the very monopolies that have strangled the economic potential for the youth. Their stolen assets must be reclaimed and turned into a youth entrepreneurship fund where empowering young Iranians to create, to build, and to think. The goal is to promote economic independence. She also discussed the importance of having free universities to restore campuses as centers of thought rather than tools of ideological control by the regime. And I think it's really important that students are the center of freedom and have these forums to associate in dialogue and create scientific hubs to, like I said, think, to question, and to create. And most importantly, she reiterated and highlighted that guaranteeing women's leadership is essential to carrying out her plan for equality and inclusivity. The compulsory hijab and all degrading laws against women will be repealed and replaced with laws that actually empower them.
Thank you, Mickey. And from your perspective, what is one of the most significant points in Maryam Rajavi's 10-point plan?
Yeah, I mean, I would like to preface by saying all of Maryam Rajavi's points in her plan are interconnected, meaning none can meaningfully exist without the other, and therefore we demand all of these rights together because they collectively define a genuine and free democracy that we truly seek. That being said, I believe her point about establishing a strong and independent judiciary is a good starting point. Having a robust judicial system that functions as a check and balance on the government's power is absolutely vital to protecting any democracy. The Iranian regime has gone unchecked for decades, as we've heard today, and in Iran we've seen how the government often suppresses dissenting voices under the common pretext of national security, even targeting those who simply write articles or publish them speaking out against the Iranian regime. And having a strong judiciary is vital to protecting this democracy. And as a student of law, I believe that the rule of law and this foundation of a just and free democracy is essential. And I have seen how it can either dismantle or uplift certain groups of people. And this goes hand in hand with the idea of the separation of church and state. And in this context is for why we advocate for a secular system of values, what can be referred to as secular religion, where freedom and principles of equality are based on human rights rather than one person's interpretation, we should say, of religion. And such systems ensure that justice and governance remain impartial, which is very important in allowing everyone to freely live under the law. And religious doctrine such as Sharia law, that is very, very much prominent in the Iranian judicial system, cannot coexist with any sort of impartial judicial process or democratic governance as a whole. So all of those things really hone in on the separation of church and state and the freedom of expression.
Thank you, Mickey. That was a great job at looking at how the plan gives Iran's youth not only hope, but a roadmap for freedom. But plans alone don't bring change. The people do. And it's the brave young Iranians risking their lives every day who are the turning point that bring that vision into action. And so, Ryan, this brings us to those heroes that are on the ground today, the resistance units. How have these groups reshaped youth activism and the broader fight for freedom in Iran?
Well, thank you for the question, Nicole. As you know, one of the main themes of this convention has been the resistance units inside Iran. And as Mohammad Reza mentioned, when a regime that executes is the highest per capita executioner of minors, the response of society has been to fight the regime with fire and join the resistance units, and it's ever so expanding and growing every day. So I would frame the resistance units as the tip of the spear of society inside Iran. They are deeply embedded within society. They are the nurses, the students, the doctors, the workers, and the youth of Iran. They operate across every single province of Iran, and especially within the few past years, they have especially expanded due to the 2022 uprising, which more than 3,600 of them were arrested. And despite these immense challenges, they have continued to grow and thrive within Iranian society. They are part and parcel of society itself. I would say that the resistance units are really the guiding beacon of hope and light for the Iranian people in a land full of darkness where the clerical regime rules. And every day, as Mohammad Reza mentioned, the regime doesn't allow freedom of expression. It doesn't allow your basic rights to be expressed. So these resistance units, they carry out daily acts of defiance. They target centers of repression. They write slogans on the wall. And while these acts, we may see the final result as just a slogan on the wall, it is not simply just an act of defiance. It's a statement that someone dared to do this, that it's more than just that slogan on the wall. It shows that someone is willing to stand up to the regime and show that the regime is not 10 feet tall. It is a dictatorship on its last legs. It's weak and afraid. As many others have mentioned, the regime leaders and officials often warn that the MEK resistance units inspire the youth of Iran, and that fear speaks volumes to how much they've grown and how powerful they are within society, to the point where today we see these resistance units on video publicly expressing their support for the MEK and NCRI. They are in Tehran in broad daylight with motorbikes, not afraid to express, and they're willing to sacrifice their lives, and they will achieve freedom for the people of Iran. And lastly, my last point would be that despite the censorship, the executions, the prison sentences, the regime has failed to break the people's will, and the spirit, and there's a new spirit in this new generation that is rising, the regime cannot crush, and this will lead to the regime's downfall.
Thank you, Ryan. I would like now to explore what role does the connection between the resistance units inside of Iran and the organized resistance abroad, like NCRI, play in sustaining the movement? And how does this amplify the impact of youth-led activism?
The resistance units keep the flame of resistance burning inside the country, and the NCRI ensures that the flame is protected and seen throughout the world. While this synergy did not emerge overnight, it was built over decades of sacrifice and struggle by the MEK and the NCRI, from the 1988 massacre of 30,000 political prisoners who said no to the Khomeini regime, to the brave men and women in Ashraf who have fought and sacrificed everything to achieve a free Iran. From the early days of confronting the regime, the MEK and the NCRI have created the political, social, and ideological groundwork for today's freedom movement. This connection is a culmination of this foundation, and their courage and their resistance and the refusal to betray their ideals is instilled in today's resistance units. And so we see that the foundation that was laid by the MEK and NCRI is now instilled in the resistance units, and this will ultimately lead to the path to victory and a free, democratic, secular Republic of Iran. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan, for giving your insight on how the resistance groups play a huge part in our movement. I would like now to move to Sina. Sina, you're pursuing your JD to become a lawyer here in America, dedicating yourself to justice and the rule of law. I'd love to turn to you to explore that vision for Iran's future. Why are young Iranians committed to regime change as opposed to incremental social and economic progress, and how can that change be accomplished?
Thanks, Nicole. I think that's a very important question, because when we talk about regime change, it's important to acknowledge that it is a serious inquiry. It's one that has significant costs, and that burden has to be carried by the current generation of Iranians. So I think, as Mohammad Reza was outlining earlier, the landscape right now that young Iranians see is very bleak. These are people who are incredibly bright, incredibly motivated, but have grown up knowing nothing other than repression and terrorism. And how has that manifested itself? It's manifested itself in things like off-the-rails inflation upward of 30 to 40% annually, unemployment levels skyrocketing, lack of educational opportunities, all of that coupled with significant thought policing by the MOIS that we see in things like people like Ali Younasi and Amir Hossein Moradi, who have been swept up out of their universities for nothing other than the thought crime of supporting the MEK and daring to think about the idea of freedom and the separation of church and state. And so against this landscape, I think Iran's youth see no hope for progress within this current regime. They've been fed lies over and over again from people like Rafsanjani to Khatami to Rouhani, now Pezeshkian, calling themselves reformists, promising one more election we'll moderate, one more nuclear deal we're going to moderate, we'll give back money to our people, but none of this ever happens. And yet, each election only results in more and more repression. And we saw the charts earlier this morning with, under Pezeshkian's rule, a so-called moderate, we've had over 1,500 executions, an increase of tenfold over what we were seeing earlier in the century. And so this reflects a regime that is afraid of its people, but also a landscape that cannot be moderated, cannot be improved. And so the individual cause of any given uprising might come from a variety of social ills. For example, in 2009, it may have been because of the election fraud. In 2017, it may have been because of oil price shocks. In 2022, we of course know is because of a reaction to the morality police's killing of Mahsa Amini. But very quickly, each of these uprisings radicalizes overnight into a cohesive nationwide call animated by chants like death to Khamenei, down with the dictator, down with the oppressor, be it the Shah, be it the mullahs. This reflects an understanding among Iran's youth that the individual cause of one grievance might be an economic problem, it might be a social policy, but the root cause of all of their grievances is a regime that is filled with corruption, terrorism, and oppression at every single level, and the only solution to that is to take it down and replace it with a truly pluralistic democracy. And I'd like to make one final point about that, building off of what Ryan was talking about earlier, is the confidence in the idea of an alternative. You know, regime change and going out in the streets, it takes a lot of sacrifice, and I think the reason that we see successive uprisings, even despite all the imprisonment, all the killings in the streets, all the executions, Iranians are still willing to come out in the streets 1 year later. Why is that? It's because they have faith in an existing alternative in the form of the NCRI and MEK. And the resistance units play a crucial role in both organizing and radicalizing these protests, but also giving hope that people, when they pour out in the streets, they're not fighting alone. They're part of a national movement that has decades of history behind it and a true platform.
Thank you, Sina. And why do you think that the MEK resonates with young Iranians and their priorities for the future?
I think the first part of that is to ask yourselves, what are the requirements of an alternative in order to have transition? You know, you have the downfall of the regime, but how do you actually facilitate a new government? And I think some of the elements of that are, one, you need a commitment to democracy. Second, you need an organizational capacity with international and domestic support. And third, you need the institutional guardrails to actually facilitate things like free and fair elections and the formation of a new government and new societal structures from the ground up. And when we look out in the landscape of so-called alternative movements, the only one that actually has a consistent platform to deliver on this has been the MEK. And a crucial part of this has been their steadfastness in their first principles and their commitments to democracy and freedom. Dating back all the way to 1979, when Khomeini first came to the scene, many folks were saying, let's give him a chance, let's negotiate, let's make some compromises. But the MEK was the only group who from day one recognized that the so-called Vilayat al-Faqih, the Islamic jurisprudence that Khomeini promised, was antithetical to any form of popular sovereignty, any form of democracy, any form of progress that the 1979 revolution was intended to achieve. And for this reason, the MEK has been under significant repression, significant targeting by the regime. And I think it's important to recognize that its advocacy has not been in the form of just rhetoric. It's not in the form of slogans that they tweet from 10,000 miles away and call it a day. This has been backed up by a fight on the ground for decades that has been relentless, and a significant price has been paid. For example, throughout the 1980s, there was a reign of terror that Khomeini unleashed on the MEK that culminated in the execution of 30,000 political prisoners in 1988 for the crime of supporting the MEK. Or throughout the 2000s, there were successive attacks launched by the Iraqi government at the behest of the Iranian regime on the unarmed freedom fighters in Camp Ashraf in Iraq. And I think most of us in this room will remember in 2017 when the Iranian regime attempted to bomb one of the NCRI's annual rallies attended by tens of thousands of supporters from around the world and dignitaries in Paris. I think that final point is especially crucial because it reflects how afraid this regime is of the MEK. Why else would you risk the total international catastrophe that would come from bombing a national gathering inside of Europe attended by the highest level people of the intelligence agencies, government, etc., all around the world? The answer is because they're afraid of the MEK. Because the MEK... The MEK represents an unwavering commitment to popular sovereignty, to democracy that is at odds with everything the mullahs believe in. And that's why, just as they're willing to kill their own people to support proxies around the Middle East, they're willing to take the extra step of assassinating and targeting and intimidating peaceful organizers around the West because they want to try to intimidate and suppress the MEK, but they have failed. And at every step of the way, the MEK has grown in support, just as we see in the uprisings. Each wave gets more radical, gets more widespread, and I think it's the stark contrast to the fake opposition movements we see in things like social media, who have no principles and use these uprisings to promote themselves and try to take advantage of what's going on inside of Iran to anoint themselves the unelected leaders of the Iranian people. I think an example of that we're all familiar with is the son of the so-called Shah, who's been living in luxury for the past several years and now suddenly decides to surround himself with a cabal of ex-reformists, ex-regime insiders, ex-Savak agents, to anoint himself whether it's one day the so-called monarch, the crown prince, etc., of the regime. But these are deeply unserious people who do not have a vision, and Iranians do not want to go back to the monarchy of the past. They are willing to go forward, and they want to make that change.
Thank you, Sina. Thank you. I'd like to now turn to something a little bit more personal. And maybe we can spend 1 minute each with the remaining time that we have. But for each of you, what was the defining moment that pushed you to join MEK? What experiences or these realizations brought you here today? And we can start with you, Mohammad Reza.
Sure. I think being a part of the movement is really about the values that you share, the vision that you have, and the things that you believe in. So I think, if you look at Maryam Rajabi's 10-point plan, I've always been for freedom of expression. I've always been for separation of church and state, and I've always been against the death penalty and single-party rule. So in those terms, I think I've been a part of this movement long before I consciously make a decision to become a part of the movement. I think I share this with a lot of people inside Iran. But if the question is when I consciously made a decision to become a part of this movement, was not until after I left Iran when I realized that the second option that I was talking about earlier, to leave Iran and just live your life elsewhere, was not any less humiliating than living inside Iran and not saying anything. I think that was a turning point for me. I would wake up every single day to the news of, family dispersed, someone, experiencing undue hardship, and, someone being beaten on the streets or executed. And I just couldn't. I couldn't create this bubble for myself outside Iran, thinking that if everything is fine in this bubble that I've created for myself, my people are fine. I couldn't do that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mohammad Raja. Nikki?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what Sina said is a big part of why I support the NCR and the MK and their neighboring organizations, is because they have a legitimate framework that actually enables a democracy. Because when this regime falls, because it will fall, when it does, what's next? If we leave this space for another Khomeini, another mullah to enter in, we failed as a movement. And I don't believe that this movement has that in them. I think that a lot of Maryam Rajavi's 10-point plans are pillars of the United States Constitution. They are fundamental in carrying out basic freedoms of human right. And the main thing that I really like is, like I said, the legitimate framework they offer, but also we don't argue that, when the regime falls, Maryam Rajavi should go in and be president, that we should take in governance, but we rather advocate for a temporary form of governance to ensure and mobilize a legitimate, permanent government that will stay and will carry out a true democracy. And I believe the NCRI does that very well.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Nikki. Ryan?
Well, my mother was a political prisoner in Iran, and she was arrested at just 17 years old, and her and thousands of other resistance supporters of the resistance endured these brutal tortures that shaped my understanding and gave me a first-hand perspective on what true resistance means to this regime. I couldn't just keep watching, and at some point you have to start moving forward, and the NCRI and the MEK was and is the only true path to move forward and reach a democratic and prosperous Iran.
Thank you, Ryan. Sina?
I'd say I was born and raised here in the United States, but I've had the good fortune of having an incredible upbringing by my parents, who've shared many of the stories that they've experienced in Iran. And hearing the stories of folks who have endured suffering in Iran gives me a sense of an obligation to use the privileges and opportunities that I have in the United States to be a voice for them. And one of the things that's been very impactful in my life is I've had the opportunity, really the privilege, to meet many of the young members of the NCRI and MEK in Paris. And when you meet these people, it is truly mind-blowing. These are individuals who are very smart, very well-educated, many of whom grew up in Iran, were able to get out, move to the West, and they could have done anything with their lives, but instead they decided to commit the rest of their lives to fighting for their homeland. I think that reflects a true sense of passion for freedom, a true sense of commitment and selflessness. And when I'm sitting here, I feel an obligation to continue their fight, do everything I can, and I feel, honestly, I'd say one of the biggest honors in my life is the fact that I've been able to grow up around these types of people and also play a small part in carrying on their voice. And I'd love to...
Thank you, Sina.
Nicole, I'd love to turn it to you. You mentioned at the beginning your own relationship with your father. I'd love to hear your introduction to the MEK.
Yes, thank you, Sina. I'm a first-generation Iranian American and first-generation university student, and so that brought up a lot of questions growing up. It came from, where's your father from? Oh, why didn't he go to university? And every single time I responded, without hesitation, He was a political prisoner fighting for freedom in Iran. And I never felt ashamed to say this to anyone that I've met. I know, yeah, thank you. The Iranian government loves to use humiliation and fear as a mechanism, but I don't feel that way at all when I describe my father. When I look at him, I see the memories of 120,000 lost souls in this brutal regime. And so lots of people, they idolize movie stars, athletes. I idolize my father from his bravery and his strength. And so I find myself here today. It's not just my right, but it is my duty as a daughter of my father to continue this fight for a free Iran. Thank you. Thank you. I would like to say a couple of words before our audience Q&A session. But today we've heard the truth. Iran's youth are not victims of oppression. They are the engines of freedom. The people, they hold on to something stronger than what the regime can ever comprehend, and it's the will to change. From the brave young men and women risking everything inside of Iran to the organized resistance abroad, a new Iran is already taking shape, one built on equality, democracy, and justice for all. And make no mistake, that future is not far away. It is being created right now by the courage of this generation. Thank you all. Okay, we would now like to switch over to a couple of questions that we have from the media. I would like to, Ryan, would you mind sharing me some of the questions? Okay. Well, looks like there's no media questions today. I think we answered it all. We did a good job. That's what I'm hearing. So, would like to thank you all again. Thank you. It is our honor to be here. I would like to thank all the panelists for sharing their stories. I really appreciate it. This is a huge for the movement. So thank you again.
Dinner.